Well, good morning, everyone. Just want you to know I always travel with Florida sunshine, so you can thank me for the weather out there. Well, I am truly honored to be here. I am a registered technology transfer professional, and I have been doing technology transfer for several decades. Like so many of my colleagues, I did not go to college thinking I want to be a technology transfer professional. In fact, I didn't even know what it was. I moved to Gainesville, Florida with my husband, which is a small college town, not unlike Reykjavík, and ended up working with the NASA Regional Technology Transfer Center, which was part of the College of Engineering, and now can't imagine doing anything but technology transfer. And I will say that had somebody told me back then when I first started in this profession that I would be standing before you in Iceland today talking about it, I would have suggested that perhaps they cut back on their alcohol consumption. Is just the arrow here, or is there a clicker? Oh, is this? Oh, here we go.
You can use the mouse.
Okay, I'll just use the arrow. So as I mentioned, I've been in the profession for 2 decades, and in that time, the awareness for technology transfer has grown by magnitudes. And in fact, in the United States, the visibility of technology transfer is at an all-time high. And we would routinely hear President Obama talking about the importance of moving new discoveries out of the research labs and into the marketplace where they can have an impact on both people's lives as well as the economy. And as a result of this, there's a lot of pressure on the federal agencies who are funding this research to do more to ensure that these discoveries are getting out into the market. Now, technology transfer seems like a relatively straightforward concept. You fund research at universities and institutions. From that research, new discoveries occur, which are licensed to companies. In the United States, about 1/3 of the time, the licenses are to large corporations. About 1/3 of the time, they're to small and medium enterprises, and about 1/3 of the time, they're to startup companies. Those companies, in turn, manufacture products and services, create jobs, and ultimately pay taxes, which then go back into funding additional research. Seems relatively straightforward, and yet the reality is it is fraught with nuances and complexities that are often misunderstood. And unfortunately, oftentimes the people that misunderstand them are the same people that have the authority and the ability to mandate legislation and allocate resources. And while they often do so with the best of intentions, it oftentimes creates barriers to the process. One prime example, I was reading on the plane, there's a new UN council that was put together to make recommendations, and one of the recommendations was that all new discoveries that are cures for diseases should not be patented. They should be able to be deployed to all parts of the world. Well, the reality is, unless you patent it, you're not going to get an investor to invest in it, and thus that new discovery will never have an impact on anybody's life. So just one example. And I mentioned that I am affiliated with the Association of University Technology Managers. I'm, in fact, the past president. And while I was on the Autumn board, one of the things that we did is create a video to help explain technology transfer to everybody from the president on down to my grandma. So I'd like to share that video with you. Universities, hospitals, and research centers conduct a lot of research that generates groundbreaking inventions that not only save lives, but improve the way we live, work, and play on a daily basis. Technology transfer plays a central role in bringing these ideas from the lab to the market. Hi, I'm Jane Muir, a technology transfer professional and a member of the Association of University Technology Managers, or AUTUM. We're the people who work to transfer the discoveries developed at universities and research centers to companies that can turn them into products and services that benefit society. This process is called technology transfer. Government and private organizations provide funding that supports critical research from which new discoveries are created. Technology transfer professionals work to protect these discoveries and create partnerships to help these discoveries become new products. This sounds simple, but there are many steps involved in taking an idea and turning it into a product. There are many challenges. Some ideas make it, some don't. Sometimes an idea is transferred to an existing company, and sometimes it inspires the creation of a brand new company. These companies turn these ideas into products that have a huge impact on improving lives, creating jobs, and supporting new research discoveries. To learn more about the Autumn Better World project and the many ways that technology transfer is making the world a better place in your community, visit Autumn at autumn.net. So that video is actually available on the Autumn website, and it can be downloaded. So if any of you are having difficulty explaining to your grandmother what it is you do, you can share the video on YouTube with her. So I've given many talks around the world, and their major challenge that most tech transfer offices that I've encountered seem to incur are unrealistic expectations. And oftentimes these unrealistic expectations focus on two things. One of them is timing, and the other one is money. Because Silicon Valley has gotten so much attention, it seems that many aspiring TTOs want to be the next Silicon Valley. And the reality is that is only going to set you up for failure, because Silicon Valley was a product of a convergence of people, timing, new ideas that came together that I dare say probably won't ever happen again. That being said, that doesn't mean that we all can't do some amazing things in our own backyard. We just have to be realistic in setting our goals and managing the expectations, and really having a clear understanding of what success looks like. And I think that as you all venture on this journey of forming a collaborative TTO, that is going to be fundamentally important to you, is creating realistic expectations and establishing that culture. Now, I mentioned that I come from Gainesville, Florida, and just want to share with you a little bit. I actually grew up in Minnesota, which is a Nordic community, so traveling around your country, I very much could relate to many of the things and enjoyed it immensely. As you can see, the population in Gainesville is 127,000. The average age there is 25, and the University of Florida is actually the largest employer. So if you think about setting up a TTO in a not so big, we're not Boston, we're not, out in Silicon Valley, we are in a small community. That said, we have one of the largest research universities in the United States, single public research university. It's actually the 14th largest. There's over 50,000 students and over 4,000 faculty with 16 different colleges. And if you look at the entire state of Florida, there is, I believe now, pushing 20 million people. The University of Florida is actually the largest employer in the state. And when you look at these other employers, if you think about who can commercialize these research discoveries that are being generated at the university, and you look at these large employers, it really is kind of a mismatch. That being said, at the university, there's over $700 million worth of research that goes on every year. And you can see from these numbers, we get over 300 invention disclosures every year. This year, we're actually on track to execute over 100 licenses and options. And we average about 15 startup companies per year. Now, it was interesting listening to the statistics. We've done a number of different bits of research around new disclosures and research dollars. And typically, for every research dollar, we will generate, in the according to the Autumn Survey in the United States, about every $2 to $2.5 million of research will generate a new disclosure. Now, because we are in Gainesville, Florida, to get these numbers, we had to do two things, focus on two things. One of them is marketing. The old adage of if we build it, they will come. If we have a new discovery that's going to be the next thing since sliced bread, somebody will want it. Well, the reality is if they don't know about it, they're not going to want it. So marketing is fundamentally important. The second thing was startups. If we were going to move these discoveries out of the laboratories and into the market, we had to put a lot of emphasis on startups. Now, some of the probably top 3 success stories. How many of you are familiar with Gatorade? I haven't seen it on the shelves. Do they actually sell it here? They do? Okay. So that actually came out of the University of Florida, as did Centricon, which is a termite colony elimination system. Probably don't have a lot of need for that here. But where I live, it's really important. And you see a picture of Dr. Nanyao Su there because he was actually called up to New York City and installed it in the Statue of Liberty because they were having termite issues. And then the last one there is a glaucoma drug called Trusop, which has since gone off patent. But these 3 discoveries alone have generated over $500 million in licensing income to the University of Florida. And because of that, we have been able to invest in additional research and other things that have enabled us to build a very strong TTO. Now, I mentioned startups. Again, we're in a small town, but because of the success that we've achieved both with the licensing and the startups, we are actually, this was a title of a Business Week article, and even though it's getting a little bit old at this point in time, I still like to put it up there because anytime a university like ours can be compared with MIT or Caltech, we'll take that kind of publicity any day. I mentioned startups. Probably our biggest success story to date is a company called RTI. They do sterile biological implants for surgeons and now have over 1,100 employees, most of them in our community. When this company was formed, the university, instead of an upfront licensing fee, took a piece of equity, and when it went public, they sold the stock for $60 million. Reinvested that. Half of it went into establishing an orthopedics institute and half of it into a cancer and genetics institute, which now employ many researchers that are, in fact, creating many more new discoveries. Now, this didn't happen overnight. I mentioned the challenges about timing. This was 25 years ago when this company got started. And the reality is that most life sciences, biotech types of discoveries are going to take a minimum of 5 to 10 years before they ever get to market, and millions of dollars worth of investment. And while engineering and tech-related companies don't require quite as much time or quite as much investment typically, they do typically take twice as long and take twice as much money as what most people think that they're going to take. Now, it wasn't always that way at the University of Florida. When I first started there, almost 2 decades ago, we were that office that nobody really wanted to deal with. And our office was in this building here. It's called a historical old building, but I call it a hysterical old building. Keep your eyes on the screen, and you will see why I call it a hysterical building. We dealt with rats. We dealt with bricks falling off the top of the building. We dealt with termites. We dealt with fires. We dealt with floods. So we were in a building that nobody really had much time or placed much importance on what we do. But we worked very hard over the years, and one success story at a time. In 2009, I wrote a grant and was awarded $8 million by the federal government, with the university matching it with $5 million. And we are now located in the Florida Innovation Hub, which is a 50,000 square foot incubator facility that is also home to the TTO. This is a wonderful model because every day the TTO gets new inventors who come in with their new ideas. We get entrepreneurs who are looking for their next gig. We get investors. And to be able to create that collision and instantly walk down the hall and make those introductions has been immensely helpful to us. And the good news is the only creatures that we have to share the building with are entrepreneurs. The building was built in October of 2011. And after we do surveys every year. We're just now in the process of doing a survey. But after 3.5 years, our companies had created 763 jobs and attracted $50 million in private investment. And because of that, and because the building is basically operating at capacity, it's full, I went back to the federal government, and in September was awarded another $8 million. This time the university matched it with $9 million, and we are in the process of doubling the size of the building. It will be next year, it'll be 100,000 square feet. Now, obviously, we couldn't have done that without support from the highest levels of the university. This is our former president, and he routinely, as well as the current president, touts the importance of what we do. And obviously, he had to match the $5 million and second time around the $8 million to build this facility. But I wanted to put this up there because having the high-level support is hugely important. If the senior levels of the university do not place an importance on technology transfer, then neither will the faculty or the students. So it really has done an awful lot in helping us establish the successes that we have. So I've talked a little bit about the challenges, and you're probably asking yourself, wow, if it's that hard and it takes that much time and there's that much confusion, why are we considering establishing a formalized platform for technology transfer in your country? Well, I would advocate that while it is difficult and takes a long time, it is probably one of the single most important things that you can do to have an impact on your community and your country and the world. Now, in the United States, how many of you are familiar with the Bayh-Dole Act? I understand you have a similar type of legislation. Well, this came about in 1980, and prior to Bayh-Dole, the U.S. had a dismal track record of commercializing new discoveries. There had been over 28,000 invention disclosures prior to Bayh-Dole, and only a small handful of those were commercialized, less than 5%. Since Bayh-Dole, there are thousands of products that can be traced back to research discoveries, including 153 new drugs. In addition to the drugs, that thing that we use every day called the internet, many, many new discoveries related to the Internet of Things had their foundation at universities. Now, you've heard mention of AUTUM a couple times. I just wanted to share with you, AUTUM is the Association of University Technology Managers. There are about 3,400 members in 65 countries, but the majority of them are North America. They do a survey every year, and they get, I think, between around 200 to 300 institutions that actually report metrics. This is everything from what's your research dollars, how many inventions did you get, how many licenses did you do, and this has been an immensely helpful tool for tech transfer offices, not just in the United States, but around the world, to benchmark themselves and to actually help in establishing realistic expectations around goals for some of the metrics that you actually can be achieving. Just to give you an example, in 2013, this was one-year results from just North American universities. So over 26,000 invention disclosures with over 6,500 licenses. I'm not going to read these, but you can see that the impact is pretty large. And again, you can trace these numbers back by single institution, by state. It's really a wealth of good data for you. In addition, you can see the number of startup companies. Again, these were just 1 year's numbers. Over 800 startups were formed, and average number of employees, there were only 70 institutions that were able to actually track this. So these numbers, if anything, are very low, because it's one thing to to achieve the results, but having the resources then to go back and track all of that are no small feat either. And as you establish your national platform, that might be another consideration, really to get consensus on, what are the metrics that you're going to track and how are you going to track them in a uniform manner. One thing I'll just say about the startups, there's a lot of talk about startups, not just in the US, but around the world. And the thing about startups, the job creation, there's always a multiplier effect to that, right? Because most of these startups that come out of university are technology-based, which was mentioned earlier. And for every technology-based job that's created, depending on whose statistics you listen to, or whose metrics, multipliers I should say, anywhere from 2 to 7 jobs are created in the community to support those technology-based companies, whether it be in the form of restaurants or supply chains, etc. Now, I mentioned that university inventions are changing the world. And we often get caught up in the numbers. And sometimes we lose sight of why our profession was really formed. And Bayh-Dole, the underlying principle of Bayh-Dole was to use university research discoveries to improve the human condition. And so you can see here pictured just a few of those, everything from the CAT scan to fluoride to polio vaccine. Those all had their basis in university discoveries. And here's just a few more. Now, I mentioned that these discoveries are changing the world and really making a difference in people's lives. And while the faculty and the students are the ones who come up with these discoveries, it's really the role of the technology transfer person to ensure that those discoveries get out of the lab and into the market. As I mentioned earlier, our profession before Bayh-Dole had a dismal track record of it. So I just want to share with you the importance of having and supporting those technology transfer professionals if you truly are serious about moving those discoveries out of the lab and into the market. Now, most of these examples have been life science-based or biotech-based, but obviously there's a lot of inventions out there, namely the computer. Many people aren't aware, but this computer, the computer was originally invented at the University of Pennsylvania, and this computer took up an entire room, which had less computing power than that little thing that you hold in your pocket called the cell phone. And of course, so many other things that are related to the Internet of Things came out of the universities. Now, the truth of the matter is that without technology transfer, some of these discoveries would have made their way out into the market. But again, past experience would say that it would have been a very small few. And so when I talk about changing the world and making a difference in people's lives, it sounds pretty grandiose, but it's absolutely true. That is what technology transfer professionals do. They help change the world. And even more true is what it does to people's lives. And I can tell you from personal experience that I had an appreciation for that, but really drove that appreciation home when my father had to have heart surgery. And after his surgery, we were sitting in the intensive care unit, and I was looking at all of the different machines, and I was learning about the drugs that my father would have to take for the rest of his life, and realized that had it not been for technology transfer professionals, that we probably would not have been able to celebrate my parents' 62nd wedding anniversary last fall. So when I talk about this, it's a very personal thing for me, and I'm very, very passionate about believing in the importance of what we do. Now, there are many stories of people whose lives have been forever changed, and I'd like to share with you just a few other examples from the university. This is Dr. Lempetang and Dr. Mark Good. They invented a patient simulator to teach people in the medical profession. Now, I mentioned the timing of stuff. This was invented back in 1980. There are thousands of people who learned about how to treat patients on this machine. And the company was actually sold in 2011. That's 31 years later for $130 million. So it does take a long time. This next one, Dr. Nick Musica, he has developed a number of patents around gene therapy. Interesting, this company was formed back in 2002. It has brought in, I believe, $90 million in private investment. It's gone public, and here we are today, and it just closed on a $1 billion deal. It's the largest deal that the University of Florida has ever had. And guess how many products they have on the market? 0. There's still not a product on the market. It takes a long time and a lot of money. So this next one is my favorite inventor, Dr. David Muir, who happens to have my same last name for a reason, my husband. He came up with a method of treating peripheral nerves that greatly enhances their ability to regenerate. And the company was actually, the technology was licensed by an entrepreneur back in 2002. And in 2013, the company went public, and they now employ, I believe, around 75 people in our community. Now, those are all obviously life science stories, but they're not all about life science. This was a company called Grooveshark that did music streaming. Anybody use Grooveshark? Okay, came out of Gainesville, Florida. They licensed a technology back in 2006. They had 50 million users, 50,000 million. Ooh, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, they had a lot of users. And they had 165 employees. Now, you can imagine in Gainesville, Florida, small town, when you've got a company that's got 165 employees, that's having a huge impact on our economy. Well, unfortunately, the big boys sued them, and they had to close their doors back in 2015, which was sad, but now a lot of the employees that were in Grooveshark are starting their own companies, and I have several of them in the Innovation Hub, so it's not all bad. Now, you're probably kind of curious about those photos. Well, every year we do a calendar, and this particular one we did called The Spirit of Innovation, and we asked the inventors, show us what it felt like when you came up with that moment of brilliance. And so this is them. Interesting story. I don't know how your faculty are. Ours can tend to be a little bit conservative and not comfortable doing this kind of thing. And so it took a little bit of coaxing. And in fact, one of the inventors came to the photo shoot, and when we told him what we wanted from him, he turned around and walked back out the door, and the photographer followed him as he got in his car and drove away. Now, one other thing about this photo you notice is that they're all men. And that, unfortunately, is indicative of what our ecosystem looks like. Before I go into that, so one other thing I wanted to share, this is part of the calendar, and I had some calendars out there. If anybody didn't get one, you can go to the UF website and download it. This has been a really, really helpful marketing tool for us for a couple of reasons. One is we tout the successes, all of the new discoveries. You know, every year, each month features a new discovery that's making its way to the market. But also, we put pictures of our staff in the calendar and talk about what they do, because it's kind of a standing joke in our profession. Oh, look, that new drug made it to the market. That inventor. There's never any mention about technology transfer and the role that the tech transfer professionals played. And while that might sound a little bit egotistical, it's not. it's really, really important because you have to demonstrate the importance of the role that you're playing if you want to continue to garner the necessary resources to continue to do your job. So as I said, we put our staff in the calendar and just tried to show them that we too have a little bit of spirit. And I mentioned earlier that that particular calendar was dominated by men. So the following year, we made a concerted effort to work with women innovators, and in 2015, our entire calendar was focusing on women innovators, which is also available on our website. So I mentioned that it's kind of indicative of our ecosystem. When we had our grand opening for the incubator that I run, the federal official came down and I had a roundtable of all the CEOs. Didn't occur to me till we were in that roundtable that everybody was going around introducing themselves, and I was the only one who could legitimately wear a skirt in that room. They were all men. So we decided then and there that we needed to, for not just because it's the right thing to do, but because of the importance of diversity in the ecosystem and the impact that diversity has, we made a concerted effort to create a program called Empowering Women in Technology Startups. We take patented technologies that we think can be the basis for a startup company, and over 10 weeks, we put women into teams that represent virtual management teams. And we teach them how to write a business plan around that technology, how to put together their investor pitch, and then in session 10, they actually give their pitch to a group of investors. And the investors routinely say that the pitches are of far better caliber than most of the venture capital conferences that they go to. So far we've had 250 women go through that program. If you want to learn more about it, the website is ewits.org. Now, I've talked a lot about the importance of startups and the role that entrepreneurs play. Just to give you a little bit of idea, in the United States, 99% of all companies have fewer than 100 employees. And 82% of all the jobs come from the smaller companies. And in fact, 62% employ less than 10 people. So the reality is, in the United States, everybody recognizes that the majority of all new jobs are coming from our startups. So when you talk about startups, what does it take? Well, there's some fundamental elements that have to come together. You need the technology or the idea around which the startup is created. And in our world, the technology is the abundant piece. We have a plethora of new ideas around which companies can be formed. You need entrepreneurs. And whether you're in Gainesville, Florida, Boston, Silicon Valley, or probably even Bergen, one of the least abundant resources are your entrepreneurs. So we do a lot to try to attract entrepreneurs, but we also do a lot to grow our own through programs like the Empowering Women program that I just mentioned. You also need funding. These technology-based companies almost always require an infusion of capital. And what we have found is that if we have a good technology, we have a solid entrepreneur or a passionate entrepreneur wannabe, and we establish a good business plan around that, we have been fairly successful at attracting funding. Facilities are also important, especially for life science companies. In our community, there are very few wet labs that are available. So in our incubator, we actually created a number of wet labs so that these companies had a place to start and grow. The other thing about incubators is that the National Business Incubator Association does an annual survey every year. And of the companies that graduate from an incubator, 5 years after graduation, 87% of them are still in existence. Now, if you know the normal success rate of companies, it's much lower than that. 87% of them are still in existence, and 78% of them stay in the community where they were incubated. So we actually have 5 incubators in our community. I like to say we have more incubators per capita than any other city in the United States. I don't know if it's true, but they're starting to quote me on that now, so I hope it is. So again, technology, entrepreneurs, funding, facilities, and you need tech transfer professionals to help, because starting these companies around these discoveries is not easy. In fact, there are a lot of statistics that say to license a technology to an established company versus a startup, it's 7 times more work to do a startup than just to license to an established company. And I see some people shaking your head, so I'm guessing you can probably relate to what I'm talking about. So I'm going to shift gears here for a little bit and talk about measuring success, metrics. So metrics are a major challenge for universities around the world. No matter what country I'm speaking in, there's always asking me about what do we measure. And there are numerous studies out there that have been done. Some of them very good studies. Some of them are absolutely ridiculous. So don't believe everything you read. Sometimes the way they put the numerators and the denominators, it just, if you understand technology transfer, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, some of the common measures are ones that I'm sure you've discussed. Licensing income or revenues, taxes, companies that are created, jobs that are created, and private investment. These are all about economic impact, and economic impact is hugely important. The reality of it, however, is that once you license that technology to an entrepreneur or startup company, that company has a whole lot more to do with how successful that company is going to be than you as a tech transfer organization do. So it's important to measure, and there are a lot of other reports out there. How many of you are familiar with BIO? It's an international organization. They do a fabulous job of measuring the economic impact, and you can see they measured between 1996 and 2013 $1.18 trillion of economic impact in the United States. Again, employing over 3 million jobs, huge, huge impact. Another interesting one was done several years ago, where they showed that the growth rate of economic impact of the university patent and licensing was actually growing at a rate significantly greater than the US GDP. So there's lots of activity. Now, while it's true that economic impact is important, I was delighted to hear talk earlier about societal impact, because I would advocate that our true impact lies more in the societal impact. If you look at technology transfer and the discoveries that have come out of the universities, there have been whole new industries that have been created. There have been cures for diseases that are now pretty much non-existent. Significant reductions in healthcare costs, and increasing the food supply. So I talked about whole new industries. Right in Gainesville, Florida, Dr. Robert Cade came up with a product called Gatorade. Before Gatorade, there was no sports drink industry. It did not exist. Now, in the US alone, it is a $7.4 billion industry. Think about the jobs, the taxes, the economic impact of that brand new industry. Cures for diseases. This is little Emma Whitehead. Her leukemia was cured by discoveries that came out of the University of Pennsylvania and St. Jude's Children's Hospital. How does one measure that impact? Reduced healthcare costs. Healthcare costs are one of the major costs for employers worldwide. This example of reducing healthcare costs is hospital-acquired infections. In the United States alone, over 100,000 people die every year from hospital-acquired infections. 1 in 7 people who goes into a hospital gets an infection they did not have before they went in there. It increases their hospital stay by an average of 7 days. Think about the costs associated with that. So at the University of Florida, we actually have 2 technologies. One of them is called the Hygreen technology. It's a simple technology with a badge by the patient's bed, by the sink, and on the doctor. And if the doctor doesn't wash their hands before they go to the patient's bedside, the beeper goes off. Because as it turns out, one of the major causes of hospital-acquired infections is the healthcare staff not washing their hands. The other is a product called Sharklet Technologies. This is a technology that was developed by Dr. Tony Brennan. He became curious. When you look at whales and other large creatures of the sea, there's barnacles and crud that grows on their skin, but not on sharks. So when he did his research, he discovered that it's the topographical pattern on the shark skin that prevents those things from sticking. So the product that's on the market today are hospital surfaces using that topographical pattern. And in fact, they have 6 other products in the market, everything from intubation tubes to stents, products where I guess hospital-acquired infections tend to grow. So again, having a huge impact on reducing healthcare costs. And reducing hunger. Dr. Borlaug, who's from Purdue University, developed a strain of wheat that was resistant to disease and had a much higher yield. And he has been recognized as the single individual who has saved more lives than any other person who has ever lived. Amazing. So in an effort to capture some of this, I said earlier that the underlying principle for the creation of the Bayh-Dole Act in the United States was to improve the human condition. And that, in my mind, is the true measure of our success. And in fact, Autumn does something called the Better World Project. If you're interested, you can go to the website and you can find over 500 stories like the ones that I just shared with you. 500 stories of products that are making the world a better place. And in fact, several years ago, we just converted that to a video campaign we called Put a Face on It, where you will see real people whose lives have been forever transformed because of those discoveries that have made their way out of the lab and into the market. And again, these videos and these stories are all available on the Autumn website. So what I'd like to do now is just share one more story with you from the University of Florida, which is the video that we did for the Put a Face on It campaign.
University Research Discoveries, making the world a better place.
All I heard was, hey, Dr. Bayh-Dole, they need you in the OR to see this patient, sciatic nerve injury, big soft tissue loss. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it's probably going to be an amputation.
We came under contact near the end of our patrol. I happened to take a round to my left leg.
I've spent most of my academic and professional career looking at how peripheral nerves grow and why they don't regrow after certain types of injuries. Most of our work involves watching rodents recover, but the idea that this sort of work can then lead to rehabilitating nerve damage for military and injured people is great.
The trajectory of the bullet missed everything vital except his sciatic nerve, which is amazing.
We talked about my options. One of the big ones was amputation.
Below his knee, he didn't feel anything. He wasn't able to move his ankle joint. But looking at his leg, it's fully intact. So I started talking to him about the nerve graft, and Edward is a young guy, and he's just thinking, give me the chance, I'll exercise every day. Amputation's not an option.
The ability to bring these to market and then to have surgeons trained to use these products, like the nerve graft, is essential.
Technology, like so many others, was a product of a brilliant scientist who came up with a new idea, a technology transfer office who worked hard to find the entrepreneur who was willing to take the risk and investors who were willing to invest. So it takes a lot of people and things that have to come together to make this happen. But as you can see from this and so many of the other stories, it's well worth the effort. So I would like to, don't want to play that again. I'd like to just close with my perceptions of some of the fundamental things that I think are going to be key to your success as you continue to move down this path of creating this professional network of technology transfer. One of them is, again, I think that support from the highest levels of the university is going to be fundamentally important for you, because not just the fact that they say it's important, but there's going to have to be resources that are allocated, and they're typically the ones who allocate them. Also, recognition of the importance of what we do, not just about the numbers, but the importance on society and people's lives. Clearly established goals. That's going to be critical, because I guarantee if we went around the room, people's ideas of what those goals should be would be probably a little bit different from one side of the room to the other. And so as you go into this as a collaborative, making sure you all agree on what those goals are. Recognition by all that technology transfer success takes a long time. In Japan, the government there allocated millions of dollars. One meeting, they sent 40 representatives to an autumn meeting. And 3 years later, they basically pulled all the funding out because they weren't seeing success. 3 years. I mean, that's barely enough time to really understand what you're doing as a TTO. So recognition that it does take a long time. Regular communications with all the constituents. This is so fundamentally important. About a decade ago, actually 2 decades ago, when I started in the profession, I'll never forget, I went to an autumn meeting, and I was meeting people, first meeting, and people were saying to me, well, what's your background? And when I told them that my background was actually in marketing and sales, they got this funny look on their face and said, what are you doing here? Because it was all scientists and engineers who really had no appreciation for the importance of marketing in terms of technology transfer. And in fact, back then, the average life expectancy of a technology transfer director was 5 years. And it wasn't because they weren't good at what they were doing. It's because they didn't follow this rule of regularly communicating to their constituents, and in particular, communicating their successes. People have to hear about your successes, so don't be humble, don't be modest. When you have a success, no matter how small, no matter how big, it's going to be really important to publicize that to all of your constituents. And do it on a regular basis, because I don't know how it is in your country, but back where I come from, people, it's their human nature to complain. You give them something to complain about, they're going to complain. And they are not going to make any bones about calling your vice president or your rector or your highest levels of the university and say, that TTO, golly gee. Well, if that's all that your rector is hearing or your high-level officials are hearing, then that's what they're going to think of you. So it's really important that as you achieve these successes, you regularly communicate those successes so that they have a balanced message and can have a recognition that it's not just the complaints, but that you are doing amazing, important things. So with that, I will leave you with one final thought, and that is, it is important to remember that what is easy to count isn't always important, and what is important isn't always easy to count. Thank you for your time.